Sicily. Theater here in Segesta, and imagine how amazingly the view was from here, and different than the Romans. They didn't have blood flowing here. These were educative events, theaters that were dealing about the gods in one way or another. And it was the central part of every major city, just like the Agora where people would meet and market. So the information, the spiritual education was so integrated. There was not really only a moment in church. It was part of life, and it was part of a beautiful life. People were living just on raising cattle and making wine. And they had enough extra energy to build something like this in every one of their cities. Why did they go out? Of course, history says because they were having food shortage and things like this. Because history and people usually cannot think about any spiritual reason that would make a large number of people move. But that's very clear when you see what they created. This one of hungry people, starving people, just had come somewhere from their home and were homesick, and these were people that were inspired by something that was maybe in the time of Odysseus in the Homeric times, 1200 before Christ. This is when this beautiful Greek civilization started, and when it had its highest point, but at highest point internally. The external manifestations, they always come only 1,000 years later, or like a Christian culture. The big churches were not built 100 years after Christ, they were built 1,000 years after Christ. So then when the culture, religion creates its external manifestations, but what's really the most interesting to me is the inner, the esoteric, the beginning. That's what fuels it all. And I think we are now at the time again where something new is starting, and something that's very, very modest and inconspicuous, but that also will bring its fruit only in hundreds of years. But that's now here in Sicily, Temple of Segesta, right 6, and imagine this is not restored. It's standing here since 2,500 years, and the Romans spared it because they thought the original people who built this were coming from the same stock as themselves, and the Romans really thought that they come origin from a culture around also around the Greek or Anatolia. So they knew there was something before Rome, and they had great respect for this tradition. And so because they thought or knew that these people that built this came from the same stock, they spared it, and they spared the people when they took over in 260 BC. And but really it's a majestic place, and imagine it was built by people. They were raising sheep and they were making wine, and imagine they built this, and like the Gothic cathedrals, they were not anxious to make it, to finish it. Actually, they say it was never finished, it was always in this state. Like the Gothic cathedrals, they were built on such a large scale that it was not about finishing, not about creating a finished result. It was a labor of love, a labor of creating states of consciousness. And this came at a time, maybe 500 years after everything had started, and was only the expression, the external expression, far away from the original esoteric essence. And this is really what I think is the most amazing thing, that there are cultures, there were cultures, and there were actually all cultures that are now are based on esoteric spiritual beginnings, like our Western civilization. And this is a beautiful monument, and I know everything today is turning into a direction where again something new is beginning, something unique and very humble beginning that will give fruit only many centuries after a lot of the present had to be destructed, to make space for something new. Just like those temples had to be built on a previous civilization, like the Gothic cathedrals had to be built on the ruins of the Roman Empire, but in a new spirit. Almost 2,000 years later, here in Sicily, in Monreale, Palermo, you can see another way of turning energy into information. So all this is made from little stones, mosaics, that create those pictures. And of course it's easier to paint it, but no, they made it from little stones, and imagine what labor of love this was to put this together. It's just the same like the Greek, it's a gesta. It's putting energy into a labor of love, and this way transforming it into information, into the potential for change.